Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dr. Silva. Thank you for joining me for this talk on medication-induced hyperirritability. Irritability can be a side effect. It can be a side effect of medication. It's also obviously a target symptom, but it responds very well and very quickly, virtually overnight, to SSRIs or other serotonergic medications. Medications that increase the concentration of the neurotransmitter serotonin at the synapse, the gap between neurons where nerves communicate and where the actions of these neurotransmitters take place. You can actually get improvement in anger and resentment, even as it's getting started after the fact. After you've gotten into an argument with your spouse and you can't let go, you can't forget, you could take an SSRI on a PRN basis. I have a video on that. Please check that out, the PRN use of SSRIs, and start to feel better within the hour, even if you haven't been taking the medication. That is how sensitive the symptom of irritability is to serotonin. Again, whether it's a side effect or whether it's a symptom. But among serotonergic medications, the best mechanism of action as far as quelling this irritability appears to be the reuptake inhibition of serotonin, blocking the reuptake of serotonin at the synapse. Just very minor increases in serotonin over very short periods of time, and again, even on a PRN basis, can help reduce irritability, annoyance, and improve frustration tolerance. It can also assist individuals to let go of resentments, to not brood all day about some slight, real or imagined, some hassle or minor inconvenience. It happens immediately, it happens automatically, and without any effort whatsoever on the part of the individual by adjusting the physical threshold for this emotion. Emotions have physical thresholds above which we can't experience them. You can annihilate an emotion, as people who have experienced trouble with their libido on serotonergic medications have experienced. So just like you can calm down that passion in the bedroom, you can become dispassionate about lots of things, and the emotion that is the most sensitive to these alterations in serotonin, thankfully, is anger, and specifically irritability, which is irrational anger. Anger when you shouldn't be angry, or at least not that upset, right? When you're irritable, sometimes you're mad about things that don't even make you mad, let alone this angry about it, threatening to ruin your day. But when you're irritable, you can be annoyed by somebody breathing over their breakfast across the table from you, right? So the nice thing is, though, as much as I do encourage people to be mindful and to introspect and to take their temperature, their emotional temperature, know what you're feeling, what you're thinking as a consequence of how you're feeling, when you're being unreasonable with your loved ones and with the world at large. But that aside, taking medication that increases serotonin helps with this symptom or the side effect, whichever it may be, without requiring any thought at all. No deliberation necessary on the part of the individual, no effort, making it much easier when a person then does turn their attention to why they should be so upset about a given obstacle or insult that would otherwise have provoked significant aggravation and even rage in some individuals whose temperaments make them especially vulnerable to those types of reactions, and which now provokes only the vaguest vexation, if at all. Serotonergic medications are also effective at treating premenstrual dysphoria, when estrogen withdrawal during the late luteal phase of a woman's cycle provokes this symptom, as well as a decreased threshold for tearfulness. Rightly considered a symptom for those women who experience it, regardless of the intensity, regardless of the severity, because it represents an unfavorable departure from her usual baseline. And again, irritability can be quite irrational, let alone hyper-irritability. I mean, things are bothering you that ordinarily wouldn't have bothered you at all. But despite being a symptom that all people experience occasionally, whether due to a surge of teenage testosterone or perimenopausal hormone shifts, or sleep deprivation, or hangriness, or whatever the case may be, irritability can also be a side effect. In particular, a side effect of dopaminergic and noradrenergic medications. Medications that increase dopamine and adrenaline, noradrenaline, epinephrine, norepinephrine, respectively. We see that with the stimulants that are used to treat ADD, ADHD, and we also see it some with Wellbutrin, bupropion, an antidepressant that's also used for smoking cessation that is likewise dopaminergic. It blocks the reuptake of dopamine and norepinephrine like the amphetamines. It's not a stimulant itself, but it shares chemical structure with amphetamines. With the stimulants, we tend to see it at the end of the day. On the upslope, the same level of stimulation that often leads to confidence and gregariousness and motivation and a euphoric mood, a positive outlook, that same level of stimulation on the downslope at the end of the day can lead to edginess, tension, dysphoria, and frank irritability. So sometimes that has more to do with the direction you're going than with the absolute level of stimulation. Although angry outbursts can certainly happen at any time, and even on off days, days in which a person skips their Adderall or Ritalin or Vyvanse dose. As long as the medication is in your system and as long as the bioavailability of certain catecholamine neurotransmitters is increased. Not serotonin, though. Serotonin is the antidote. Serotonin is an indolamine. It has a different chemical structure. It is also a monoamine, but the catecholamines, dopamine, epinephrine, and norepinephrine, are derived from the amino acid tyrosine, while serotonin is derived from tryptophan. So they're all monoamines, but their actions have very different consequences in the central nervous system and throughout the body. They're hormones as well as local neurotransmitters. By the way, the other major monoamine is histamine, and irritability is a not uncommon side effect of antihistamines for many people. I took Remeron one time, mirtazapine once, and that next morning I woke up, I'm always, not always, but I'm often a little irritable in the mornings just as a consequence of sleep and waking up from sleep. But regardless of how well I slept, I'm just a little irritable during that transition phase. I'm not a morning person, in other words. But that morning, man, I don't remember what it was that was causing me. I was furious, just furious, right off the bat. I was like, what? I don't remember what it was that was upsetting me. I just remember the intensity of the emotion. I have this emotional memory. And I have this visual memory. I was standing in my bedroom on the threshold, walking into the bathroom to pee in the morning. Okay, it was that immediate. I hadn't even voided my bladder that morning, and something just made me so irritated, some random thing. And then right on its heels, some other little random thing. It was absolutely insane. It was not even anything that should have been bothering me. It was something ridiculous. And it was so stark that I immediately tied it in with, I took mirtazapine the night before. I've never heard of it causing this much irritability, but then I thought about it, and of course, it's an antihistamine, and antihistamines do that. So anyway, it was that. I'm sure there were other factors at that time. A person's frustration tolerance at any given time, and as we all know, it can vary dramatically. It's usually pretty stable according to our temperaments, which are genetically determined, but it's not constant by any means. And it's determined by myriad variables that impinge upon the chemical environment in our brains. Other factors that come into play include lifestyle variables, how well rested a person is. Some people are more prone to irritability when they're sleep deprived, for example. And certainly other medications and substances, particularly stimulants, including caffeine, pseudoephedrine, substances that don't require a prescription necessarily, and that can compound irritability. But we should remember that at the end of the day, it's the catecholamines, final common pathway of most agents that spark anger. Individuals on dopaminergic medications are typically also more verbal. They're more vocal. They talk more. Verbosity is a side effect of dopaminergic medications, and that's not necessarily a negative thing, but some of those individuals are also simultaneously more contentious. They have more difficulty holding their tongue and not getting into disagreements and arguments. Those that rage are often quite verbally aggressive, delivering tongue lashings that are much more fluent and sometimes violent. You can hurt people. I notice that I'm more talkative on Wellbutrin. And while I don't rage at people on Wellbutrin, when I have been triggered, I've certainly acted out verbally. That's the opposite effect that we see with serotonin. I have a video on the love-hate relationship, the serotonin-dopamine relationship. Please check that one out. But serotonin can lead to actual reticence, the reluctance to speak, or simply losing the relative need to say anything, which is the opposite of dopamine, which makes you feel like you really have to respond, right? You have to have the last word, or you just can't let it go, right? It's all about letting go and about not being reactionary. When you increase serotonin, you just don't need to put your 2 cents in necessarily. It's not only not to complain or argue, but just to express yourself as a matter of fact. As a matter of fact, with serotonergic agents, you can get a very mild, very subtle tip of the tongue phenomenon, the opposite of the increased speed and precision that you get with dopamine. Too much dopamine and a person can be downright garrulous, hyper-communicative, even pressured. Pressured speech is seen in mania, whether the mania is due to too much dopamine from amphetamines or bipolar disorder. So it's very important to be aware of the possibility of poor frustration tolerance, which again is a physical threshold, just like the threshold for tearfulness or the threshold for feeling overwhelmed, for panic. Now, it doesn't necessarily need to be addressed as long as the individual isn't acting out on it, as long as there's insight and one can self-monitor. But it can be exhausting, and it can certainly have deleterious effects on your blood pressure, for example, as a psychosomatic phenomenon. So if it's happening with regularity, or if it's particularly difficult for some high-strung type A individuals, or premenstrually, for example, or in combination with too much coffee, or antihistamines, or anabolic steroids, or whatever the case may be, then it probably is worth talking to a clinician. It's probably clinically relevant. And the antidote is very simple, a very low dose of an SSRI. That's the treatment of choice. 25 milligrams of Zoloft, 10 milligrams of Prozac, 10 milligrams of Paxil, 5 of Lexapro for starters. It depends on a person's body weight and especially whether or not they've already been taking an SSRI and for how long. But this actually appears to be an enduring effect that most people don't develop significant tolerance to. All other considerations being equal, it's safe and well tolerated, and it's a really nice, reliable, and immediate treatment for irritability, both the side effect and the symptom. It really works right away and even after the fact. Those most at risk are people who are a little more confrontational just at their baseline, people who don't shy away from arguments, who speak their mind, who might have control issues and being reactionary just as a consequence of their genetic makeup, i.e. their temperament. Others who are more avoidant when it comes to conflict, who loathe confrontations, who are shy, perhaps with some social anxiety, those individuals are less likely to actually feel aggravation. I'm not talking about just acting out. I'm talking about actually feeling it. Some people are so conflict avoidant that it wouldn't even occur to them to feel indignant when someone inconveniences them, or to have a significant problem coping with anger because they're just not quick to anger at baseline. It takes a lot to get them riled. And so even if there is, in theory, a lowering of their threshold for irritability or an impairment in frustration tolerance, it doesn't become clinically significant. It doesn't require the attention of a clinician because these individuals are already so mellow. That threshold is already set so high that even if you lower it significantly, you're not going to get clinically relevant irritability. And even if you bottomed it out and they were irritable or hyper-irritable, some people are just so conflict averse, it makes them nervous. They're not comfortable expressing anger, and so they get nervous when they get angry and they retreat. They leave the situation, which is probably what most of us should do when we're out of control of our job, or when we're so annoyed that just everything is getting under our skin. The best thing to do is to go take a deep breath somewhere. But you can tell yourself that you shouldn't be feeling the way you're feeling. Knowing that you're irritable, that's a good first step, but it doesn't change how you're reacting to things, because you can know you're irritable and not be able to do anything about it. But this is something that you can do. This is something you can do about it, so you don't have to wait. If going and taking a nap or eating something or working out, or those things aren't immediately available, one of your options is to take medication. And you can take it on an as-needed basis. So those individuals that are laid back and that don't really get this problem are fortunate, but I do see it in individuals that are taking stimulants, and just beware the downslope. Beware the end of the day, especially a long day. Dysphoria tends to be much more prominent in the evenings, perhaps worse with the immediate release preparations as opposed to the extended release preparations. When they wear off, sometimes it really drops people, and they can get either just very anhedonic, where their loss of dopamine makes them, it's actually a symptom of depression. They don't feel like doing anything. They're not excited about anything. They're not looking forward to anything. Other people get very tense and dysphoric and irritable. They're still stimulated enough that they can be reactionary, but they are not feeling good like they may have been feeling in the morning when they were on the upslope. And the people that tend to get the brunt of it are family members, spouses, especially children, anyone sharing living quarters, a roommate. The closer you are to that person, the more comfortable you are expressing anger, the worse it's going to be. And if it's severe enough, it can also occur very inappropriately at other times at work with coworkers and supervisors and other professional relationships. So the important thing is just to be aware of it, to be mindful when it is caused by medication, and to, of course, one option would be to stop taking the stimulant or whatever it is, whatever medication may be triggering it, as opposed to taking a second medication for it. But it's always a risk-benefit analysis, and so you really have to see what the medication is giving you and what is in your best interest in terms of managing this medication-induced irritability. The people that have it really badly, where you would really think about taking medication, are probably people that have a pretty low threshold for anger anyway, just at baseline, that would probably benefit from it, even if the medication weren't magnifying it, making it a lot worse. But certainly if it's severe enough that there's acting out, or it's ruining your day, or it's giving you physical symptoms, you're clenching your jaw so much that you have headaches, then adding a little serotonin can be very helpful. Thank you for listening. Please be sure to check out my serotonin-dopamine video and my PRN use of SSRIs video. And as always, comments are welcome.